We are joined here today by Chris Byrne, the founder of the Elaine de Kooning House, also the co-founder of the Dallas Art Fair, former senior director of the Marlboro Gallery, among a host of other roles. Thank you for being here, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for inviting me.
So in your current role as the founder, the owner, operator of the Elaine de Kooning House, tell us a little bit about the Elaine de Kooning House and what you're up to at that space these days.
Okay, so the house itself, Elaine, it was what they call a salt box house, the main structure that Elaine purchased in 1975, and Elaine's niece, Maud Freagoodnight, is here, and she's given me a little bit of background and said it was kind of an impulsive decision for Elaine, to purchase the house. And then over the next 3 years, from 1975 through 78, she added the sunroom and the studio, which I think is kind of the iconic main attraction of the house, with the banks of windows. And so Elaine worked there through 1989 when she passed away. And some of the notable portraits, some people always mention Pele and Berry Gordy, and she was good friends with Steve Ross at that time, Steve Ross's family, and and the cave walls. Those were the late paintings that she painted there. So she passed away in 1989. John Chamberlain owned the painting for a period of time up until about 1999, I think, or 98 or 99, before he built his studio on Shelter Island, which was his last studio. And then the artist Richard Burton, the painter, owned it through 2010 when I purchased it. So it's been owned by a succession of artists and then me. So I was the first one maybe to think, we should think about the history in a different way than artists would. Mm-hmm. I mean, they knew the history, but I think it's the idea of preserving it maybe a little bit of a different thing that I would bring.
And since you purchased the home about 15 years ago now, it has become a National Historic Site. It is on the Register of Historic Artists, Homes, and Studios. And it's also host to a residency program, in which you've hosted artists under your own banner, and as of last year, a joint residency program between the Elaine de Kooning House and the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center.
Right. Yeah, no, that, so I bought the house in 2010, and I started right away on the residency, just inviting friends. I mentioned Jose Lerma coming and being there maybe for 9 months. He's working on his first museum show and doing large-scale paintings. And, so that just went along until about 2017, where I thought, well, maybe I should get a website and things like that. But I think the thing that I always like to stress, or that's very important for me, is just start doing do the main thing. Don't worry about setting up and business. If it's going to be a residence, you just start getting people in there. And so it wasn't maybe formalized until 2017 with the website, and Catherine McMahon from Art News was there at the time, living there and sort of just overseeing the programming and stuff. So.
And since
and then you, Matt,
and then the Pollock-Krasner House comes into the discussion. And since we've been collaborating, we have shown the work of resident artists like Eric Hayes and Mary Claire Shabauti, and coming up in the next couple of years, we have Keith Mayerson, a former resident, will be showing here in 2026, and then we're also going to venture into sort of a new type of project, a book project with our most recent resident, Nutsa Gogoladze, a self-taught artist from Tbilisi, Georgia, which ties into your own background with self-taught artists and outsider artists. So there's been a variety of different types who you've gotten through the doors, and that now we're working with together.
Yeah, and I think it's nice, and I think it's, I guess some of the other people we've had, Joe Bradley has been at the house, Keith Mayerson, who you mentioned, Laurie Anderson was there, which is really great. I mean, I was so like shy, and I think she, there's just so much going on. That was the year that she had the weather exhibition up at the Hirshhorn, and like, she was just, every time you turn on the TV, that she's being interviewed, the Anderson Cooper. So I think she used it as kind of a respite, like the studio. She's working on projects, but it was sort of like, she has a place out here, so she could just come by in the weekend. So in terms of the residency, it does sort of like adapt in terms of the person. Like Lonnie Holly, who came out at the end of the pandemic, was here for a couple of weeks, and the work that was produced at the studio was shown at the Parish Art Museum, which was very nice. But that was that was immersive, And then someone like Laurie is just more like maybe on the weekends would be there. So I like that the house, it's a domestic vibe because the house itself is connected. The studio is connected to the house, so it doesn't feel like industrial or some warehouse that's been converted. So we're aware of that too, that it's a very kind of like more intimate and sort of and I always like to say, we really go, based on the project, how long someone would come out. So
I like that you mentioned that for Laurie Anderson, it felt like a respite, because that seems to get to the essence of why artists in the mid-20th century started coming out here to the East End of Long Island to begin with.
Her respite, like for her it might have been, but it was probably like a lot of work for anyone. I mean, she's just like had so much happening. But yeah, it's like, it seemed like a retreat in a way.
Space to work.
Yes. Yeah, and
to
just
focus on work.
Just like, yeah, exactly. So
you have been the senior director at Marlboro. You were a co-founder of the Dallas Art Fair. But before any of this, you got your start as an artist in your own right.
No, not really. I mean,
No?
well, some of the other, so I was also chairman of the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, which is the museum that's designated by Congress as like for self-taught, for visionary art, I guess. I've always organized shows. I've been in Dallas, and I don't know. What do they say, Matt? I will take any work,
But you did go to art school.
Yes, I graduated from Penn, so yes. Right. So then I forgot. Yeah, I did that graphic novel that took me 10 years to work on. So yeah.
Recap that a little bit for me, because I think it's fascinating.
So, I actually started it when I was in art school as sort of a strip, and at that time there was a lot of talk of semiotics and things like that, and so I was trying to maybe find a way of doing something without words, just something that you could sort of follow, a narrative, but that you could follow without words. And so it just developed from that. I had worked on it. Jim Iserman, who's an artist out in LA, had at one time suggested, he had some colleagues starting like a magazine for comics. It never came to fruition, but I had sort of reworked them at that time, and then I just stumbled across them, like maybe in 2000 or 2001. I'm like, I should try to develop this, So from that point, I worked pretty consistently through about 2012, and then we had it published with Marquand Editions in 2013. So yeah, it was. I guess it was the gestation period was very long, but really kind of consistently working on it for about 10 years.
And this is The Magician.
Yes.
Which is in several collections now.
Yeah, it is. It's in the, Ed Marquand, who is the publisher I had known, and Ed is, he's retired now, but he was an amazing publisher and I got to know him in Dallas. He had worked with all the museums, institutions there in terms of publishing monographs for artists, for exhibitions. And the joke with Ed was always, his space was in Seattle, and this area for editions was in Tieton, Washington. And the thing with Ed was always like, oh, Ed, I just discovered this great artist. And he'd be like, hold on. He'd go back and he'd like I've already published like a monograph about them 10 years ago. So he was just he's a super erudite guy, really very nice, charming guy. It was great. And I showed him this project because I had no plans for it, and I've been working on it for 10 years. He's like, oh, I think we could do something on this. And again, it was more in with Marquand Editions, which was a separate kind of entity that was in Hyattton, Washington. So the person who I've worked with for years, Scott Newton, went out and worked with Ed on the production. So yeah, it was, Ed's funny comment about it was like, well, what are you going to do with all these? These could be like in your mom's closet when you're done, because it wasn't, we weren't really thinking of an audience that way as a commercial thing. But, as it progressed, we kind of modified as we were going along and started to show it at art fairs. And the Arliss Fair, I think, is the right one that has for museum people. And then the Library of Congress, I forget Kathy's last name, she came, she saw it, and she was interested. So a lot of it was just that way. It's a smaller edition. There's an edition of 20 with 5 artist proofs. But showing it, we showed it at the Art Book Fair at PS1 in New York, and at MoCA, the art book fair out there in LA. So we showed it pretty consistently for a couple of years, and had a good response from libraries and people who like that kind of stuff, I guess.
So was the impetus for The Magician initially to realize the idea for the sake of the idea?
Yeah, it sort of tried to. Again, I did go to art school and things like that, so I was always interested in these kind of ideas. The only thing I can say, the artists that I admire, people like Henry Darger, some of the artists that were, self-taught or working outside of a kind of a traditional art world or marketplace. I really like the idea that they took it upon themselves to create like a whole vocabulary. Like, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to tap into this. It's like starting the world from scratch and then creating this kind of epic. And, again, it would take years. Darger worked on it his entire life. So I always thought that was like a really good challenge, and something that was always in the back of my mind, to create like an analogous world. It sounds a little crazy, but no, to me, it's the most ambitious. It's like large glass, these epic narratives. Maybe that's a meta narrative or something, I don't know.
Do you apply that same mindset in terms of creating a new vocabulary, a new world, kind of looking at things from scratch, to your work in institutional spaces and your work with the Elaine de Kooning House?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think with, again, with the self-taught or outsider art brute, folk art, there's kind of a range of this that all gets sort of kind of put in the same, conversation sometimes. But I think that with like folk art, you have artists that are working in a tradition. It's usually, you can see like a lot of Americana or things like that. And, outsider art, I guess, is something that Roger Cardinal came up with, the English historian. And I think it was pejorative. I think he's like, how can you be outside? Art brut was the Jean Dubuffet. That was kind of the earliest discovery of people who are literally in hospitals and things like that. So I'm saying in terms of looking at art, I do like where the artist like completely circles back and tries to rethink everything and tries to create create a vocabulary that it's analogous to the world, but it's not sort of just it seems separate to me. But in terms of the projects, like, I don't know, maybe like the Elaine de Kooning House, that just sort of, like, I was kind of dumb, it was just sort of like, oh, well, maybe this, I had a friend, Jose Lerma, who was showing at Andrea Rosen at the time. After I bought the house, I had no plan. I ran into him in Chicago because he was teaching at the Art Institute. And he was telling me, he's like, I have a show coming up. I need to make some larger paintings. I don't have a space. And I'm like, wait, I have a space, why don't you? And so it just sort of evolved or developed that way. So It probably seems in retrospect like starting from scratch, but it just seemed like very practical at the time. And so, when I bought the Elaine de Kooning House, that was in like December 2010. And so, Jose started that next year, and he was there for like a year, and we had to do a lot of like work to the house that wasn't necessarily cosmetic, but just like the air conditioning had never been finished in this room. And I'm like, well, why not, Jose? It's gonna be fine if there's a bunch of knocking around and hammering all day. So it kind of worked that way. And he's a very relaxed person. He was able to do his work. And so I don't really think officially of the residency starting until about 2017, when we got, the website. And I just started to think about it in a more, I just had more time to dedicate to it because I wasn't, I'd moved away from the Dallas Art Fair. And it was, it was kind of interesting. I mean, I think when I say that, though, I also, and I think you and I have talked about this, Matt, I don't like to be like too prescriptive in terms of like what any resident should do. And I find that it's so much better. Like the ideas that they have or things that come up are so much better than if I was sitting around thinking like, well, you have 4 weeks and, you have to do this and do that. So some of the best, like Catherine Bernhardt's Houses book came out of very informal residency. She was just at the house for a couple weeks because I think she was curating a show out here with Tripoli. And then, she just started to make these drawings, Andrew Geller homes. And, I had lunch with her in the city and she hands me this book, like, here's the book I made. I'm like, wow. So much better than I could have sort of like imagined, I think. So
when you purchased...
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
What was the question?
It answers many questions and poses new ones as well. When you purchased the house in 2010, you were not intending for it to become a residency program or a historic site?
So, I didn't have that idea. And I mean, it was more just something, and if there is something that's maybe a consistent kind of thing, it's even with the art fair. I mean, like it was in Dallas, it's more like, oh, well, my favorite fair was the ADAA fair at that time at the Park Avenue Armory, and I would be like, it'd be great to do this, and I'd love to, like, always thinking of myself as the audience, really. And so the same with the Elaine House, when I saw it, I'm like, wow, this is like, I would like, when I was an art student, to have access to these kind of places. So it was more just like, my joke is, or the way I remember this in a comical way is like, people have been looking at it was a weird time in the market, it was right around after 2008 and everything had really kind of gone off the rails. And I remember, having this feeling that people were showing up, considering the house, like, we'll put our air hockey table here in the studio, like, just, people come out and have different reasons to be out here. And I'm like, well, this is great. Really great history, not only Elaine, but John Chamberlain and then Richmond Burton owning the house. So I really felt like, oh, I should just, try to figure this out. But no long-term plans. And also I like to say, like, it wasn't called the Elaine de Kooning House, obviously. And it had been owned by a succession of artists, and artists just like, what are the kids called? Like repurpose things, just redesign things. Chamberlain had, I think, made a lot of modifications to the house part. The studio hasn't been changed. But yeah, so I was the first one to come along and say, oh, maybe, we should just try to preserve it. But then everything just kind of developed. Helen Harrison was really helpful with the having it on the historic artist homes and studios.
Let's get into that a little bit. You as an individual acquire this property that does have great historic import, but like you mentioned, was not known as the Elaine de Kooning House and may have, gone into, a succession of owners and maybe lost that history. So what was the process like of making this house that was on the market into the Elaine de Kooning House historic site? How did that happen?
So, it happened very gradually. I would say that what was interesting about it was, when we started, like I mentioned with Jose Lerma, he was literally there like a couple months after I bought the house. Maybe, and I just said, use it. And so we kind of fixed it as we went. I mean, it did need sort of things done in terms of the older houses always need a lot of work. So that's going on while he's using the studio. And I guess the process was, with Elaine herself, I mean, there was maybe a very small monograph about her work from a Santa Fe gallery when I bought the house in 2010. And I was just trying to collect information. And so in 2015, Brandon Fortune, who was the senior curator at the National Portrait Gallery, was put together a show. The National Portrait Gallery has the most works by Elaine in a public collection. So we got to, so I spent some time with Brandon. She came out, they hosted something at the house. And that monograph was a big deal, because then, that was probably the biggest publication about Elaine's work, other than like the Elaine and Bill things and, And then in 2016, Kathy Curtis, who's a great biographer, was working on a biography of Elaine, and that was published. And then obviously like the Mary Gabriel book, I think that was 2018 or something. So there's been a lot of momentum and interest, and I think I knew who Elaine was, and I knew, obviously the Kennedy portrait and the later cave paintings and stuff. But I think there's been a lot of interest. And for me, what's very humbling about it is I think, I'm not really a historian, I'm not but I'm interested. So I think the thing that became interesting is realizing how many different things she's done. Like she's a writer for Art News. Mm-hmm. And I always go back to saying, if you're writing about Philip Guston's show at that time, it's different than thinking about Philip Guston now. Mm-hmm. This stuff wasn't canonized maybe yet. It was still being evaluated, I guess. So she was on the front lines of that, also with teaching positions. I know she taught in Santa Fe for a while. I think at Carnegie Tech as well. And also the thing that was really impressive about her is that she continued to paint portraits. Like even out here, when she was out here after 75, she painted like Pellé's portrait and Berry Gordy. And I can just sort of imagine that there would be that would be considered retrograde by that first generation of New York school painters or AbX, and the fact that now it seems so right. Like she did all these things. That's a totally great model of existing, as an artist. But I think because there were so many different things, I think maybe it was harder to map her, what she was doing. Mm-hmm. And so, people are catching up. So that period from 2010 when I bought the house, through now has been a really great reevaluation. Again, I mentioned some of the publications and things about her work and her generation of artists. So that all sort of kind of acted as an impetus in terms of, on a practical level. Again, Helen Harrison was really helpful. I mean, we can cut this, but one of the comical things was when you have a new project, you have a lot of energy. I was just collecting what I could about Elaine and sending it to the parks people hey, you should give me a plaque. And this guy's do not call my office. It wasn't like I was that crazy, but it wasn't until you realize you work on nonprofits or whatever, and you realize there's people who write grants, or there's people who do this. So Helen was really helpful in terms of putting us in touch with Karen Kennedy, who really great historian, and she was able to do all the research. I have another joke, Matt, if we have time. So this is one of the favorite stories about the house. So Karen Kennedy had been in touch, and they kind of gave us a green light that we could present this to the New York Historical Board, and it goes from the state first, and then it goes to the National Register. It's all happening kind of during the pandemic. So there's a Zoom call where they're going to vote on this. And, Karen said, well, listen, I'm going to do the presentation. I've done all the, I know the committee, and I know, so it's but you should be on the call, because they're going to want to know who the owner is. And so I think there may be 5 different things that were being considered for this. And so Karen does an amazing job, and I'm always God's whoa, I didn't know that. I'm kind of listening with everyone else, wow, that's amazing. I'd read her report and everything, but it was still And then, all the board members like, this is great. Finally, a woman recognized in this generation, this, like, this is just so terrific. Okay, who's the owner? It's like some guy from Texas. It was like a little deflated, like, so.
Now,
Is that joke okay to tell?
yeah. So you came to be the steward of this space pretty organically.
Yeah.
Now that you're in that position, would you say you feel a sense of responsibility over not just the site, but Elaine's legacy?
I mean, I think there are other people, like I mentioned, Kathy Curtis, Brandon. I mean, I think there's really scholarship that's been applied to her work and her biography now. I mean, I think, in terms of people who want to come and see the house, that's kind of, we've talked about that in terms of, I think you guys get a lot more people over here, but we don't solicit, but, we're available, and if people get in touch, then they can come and see the house. And, I think in that way, if people contact us and I can help or at least put them in the right direction, like with, the people who are the executors of Elaine, sometimes with just reproducing works and things like that. So try to be helpful. But.
Now, something very unique about your site is that for those of us who are historic artist homes and studios, for the most part, our studio spaces are time capsules of when the residents of these homes lived and worked here.
The Miss Havisham model, that's what I like to call it.
Yes. Your studio is still active. The residency program that you date to 2017 allows artists to work and produce and create in Elaine's original studio. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy of the Elaine de Kooning House as both a historic site, but also as a contemporary force in artistic production.
So this is interesting, and I know we've spoken about this. So I kind of feel in retrospect when I think about it, the idea of like, well, when I got the house, I'm going to try to preserve it, and I think the other artists, to their credit, like the studio, which is Hans Noe was involved in the design. He recently passed away, the architect. That has really remained intact, and there have been some modifications to the house part, the interior. But I think that, wait, I forgot where we were going with this. What were we?
The Elaine de Kooning House and studio as both a historic site, but also as a force in contemporary art.
Right.
So
Residency. I think the thing that, that again, in retrospect, these are kind of ideas that are in conflict, right? You're trying to preserve something as we're having people come in and use it.
Yeah.
So that it's kind of an interesting balancing act. I don't know if there's there's just one solution, because each artist is different, and that goes to the way, like when artists come in, it really, there's no set period, but we like to think more like by project. One thing I did notice, and this is the part that I think you and I discussed, I had gone to Terra Foundation, which is one of the sites is in Normandy, is Monet's gardens, and I won't give away anyone's names, but this is years ago, before I owned the Elaine House, and we went in and had a residency program, and it was cool. And there was like, whoa, Monet's gardens, and there's like guys up there from Williamsburg who are just like painting whatever glam rock thing they were painting in Williamsburg. It was like free space, I don't care, Normandy, Williamsburg, wherever. And so there's always that component, right? Artists want space, and they might have a project. Joe Bradley has been a resident twice, and the second time was just sort of during the pandemic, and he had a show he was putting together for Zurich, and he couldn't get back into the city, and we were kind of shut down too, like everyone. And I said, well, you guys are out here, just use the studio. And so there's things like that, but the tendency, and this is, I think, where we get to like art collaboration, is, I've noticed that artists are like much more aware of the content coming out here. Like Keith Meyerson's a great example. Keith's a friend, and he has an ongoing project called My American Dream, where he paints from any kind of source material. It can be plein air, it can be photographs, Instagram, whatever. But it's a cumulative way of showing like his experience, I guess, in the U.S. It's just ongoing in the way that you would think of a comic panel. I mean, there's like kind of a loose sort of analogy that way. And, he came out when we were talking, and we've been friends for a while, and he said, I want to do something on the East End. I'm like, well, come out. That makes so much sense. And he was over here, painting the studio. He went to Green River Cemetery and painted Elaine's grave. And so that's where everything kind of just like connects in a great way. The residency has to do with where the residency is, and nothing against you glam rock fans, but it's just a little bit more, it just seems richer to me. And I think that's some of the things with, Marie Claire coming out and, where they're tapping into what's here. And that's been a tendency, like I go back to like Catherine Bernhardt's book called Houses, where it was all about Andrew Geller's homes and Elaine's house and, doing architecture out here. I mean, that would happen here, and it's created here, so it's kind of cool.
Now, we started our collaboration in 2024, which is a joint residency with the Elaine de Kooning House and the Pollock-Krasner House, where artists are invited out to live and work in the Elaine de Kooning House, producing a project and exhibition work that relates to both sites. Even before our joint project, however, it feels like site specificity was a value, a core tenet of your approach to a residency program that I think has really stayed consistent in our collaboration. Artists that we have and will both work with, Keith Mayerson, Eric Hayes, Mary Claire Shabauti, Nutsa Gogoladze, in some way, shape, or form, all of the work that they are producing at the Elaine de Kooning House relates to this region where we are.
Right.
Or the artists associated with our space. Like Eric Hayes, his work was very much a reflection on his relationship with Elaine de Kooning.
Right.
Mary Claire, her work was quite literally her interpretation of our sites. Is site specificity, how important is that to you going forward?
So again, not as like a prescribed element, but I think to use a specific example like Eric Hayes. So this is I think a really beautiful kind of project, how this developed. So I wasn't aware of Eric's work, and Carla McCormick, who's a friend, really well-known critic, very, very excellent critic, just sent me an email and said, hey, you should know about Eric's work. He's really worked in a lot of commercial projects, which I wasn't totally aware. I think I knew whatever they call it, his brand or something like that, but didn't really know Eric's work so much. But he and his sister had their portraits painted by Elaine in 1972. So it's like, wow, this is kind of interesting. So I got in touch with Eric. He came out and, decided that a little bit of background with Eric, he had kind of been a street graffiti artist, and then he had gone and worked with a lot of, he worked with Nike. He did the ski uniforms for the USA team. He worked with, I think it was Def Jam, like Rick Rubin, and did like Beastie Boys. I think he did the Check Your Head graphics. And so he had this like really illustrious kind of like career in, I don't even know what they call it anymore. Like, it's not really commercial art, but like design and stuff like that. And he was like, well, I want to, I was making paintings, and I want to come out, do the residency, and start to make paintings. And it was great. And at that time, we had been working, he came a couple of years ago. And then when you and I initiated the program, I'm like, oh, this would be great to show Eric's work. It was like the missing aspect of it. In terms of having a residency, we typically don't really use this space as an exhibition space. It's not a white cube space. And so sometimes there's something that necessitates like, oh yeah, this is the perfect sort of like final part in this project as it developed. And so, I really enjoyed seeing the paintings here. And Eric literally went back and repainted the painting that Elaine had painted of him. And it was all these just kind of different iterations of like what the original was. Not in this like, I mean, not in a critique of originality or reproduction, but just in a natural way of like how these kind of images grow. So yeah, so that was good. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that obviously it's just such a, you never know anything's missing until something, oh yeah, this makes so much sense. And it was really with Eric's show that the light bulb went off, like, oh, this is so great to work with you and work on this kind of like tandem residency exhibition thing.
You mentioned earlier the idea of balance in terms of balancing the historic and the contemporary energy of the Elaine de Kooning House. I think there's also a balance in the artists who participate in the program. You know, you've had very established, academically trained artists like Joe Bradley, Catherine Bernhard at the house. You've had artists with commercial backgrounds like Eric Hayes, who also works in the fine art space. But going back to one of your early interests, you've had self-taught artists like our most recent artist, Nutsa Gogoladze from Tbilisi, Georgia. You know, you could describe as a self-taught artist, an outsider artist, whatever labels you want to put on it. But there is this range of the established and the unknown that I also find very interesting.
Right.
Where do you see the early career or the unknown or the self-taught artists fitting into a program like this?
So it's a real interest of mine. I mean, again, I mentioned Susan King's work, who was from New Zealand, and I curated her first show in the U.S. Kenny Irwin, who has Robolights in Palm Springs, which is an amazing environment. Even calling an environment, anything kind of like neuters it in a little bit. I mean, it's just insane. You know, here's the guy who, in a good way, guy who's, you know, just basically started to make sculptures in his parents' 2-acre place in Palm Springs, and it became a big attraction, so much so that they had to kind of like shut it down because it was getting too many visitors over the holidays. But, you know, so it's a real interest for me, and, you know, I know that there have been a history of shows with self, like Parallel Visions, and this idea where they try to make, you know, that there's some kind of analogous, you know, this artist is doing this and the contemporary artist is doing that. I really come to think that it's maybe self-taught work is more source material for contemporary artists. Like I know like Jim Shaw, Mike Kelly, who I've had a chance to talk to, and they're big collectors, you know, obviously Jim Shaw with thrift store painting shows and stuff. So I actually feel like it's, you know, I think it has more of a importance in contemporary art than maybe people credit it for. I mean, it's like, oh, it's outside, but I do think people who are aware of it know how, you know, it's like this. I mean, when you go to art school, you deal with art with a capital A, and I think self-taught artists are people who are making it for personal expression. You know, it's like a little a. It's like, it's personal expression. And somehow, paradoxically, that can be more innovative. You know, like Henry Darger is a great example where, yeah, mechanical reproduction, well, he's doing it out of necessity for this epic narrative he's telling. You know, he's using Xeroxes or whatever rudimentary kind of like reproductive things he can get his hands on. But it's not like a dissertation on reproduction in the 20th century. So it's just coming at it a different way, you know, and I think, so I'm good friends with Andrew Edlin, who is, I think, a very famous dealer in this area and owns the Outsider Art Fair, so I've exhibited there. Sometimes like Campbell Smith, we did a show of Campbell's work out here in East Hampton before he sort of gained some notoriety and showing in New York and Philadelphia and stuff. So, yeah, no, I think it's really important. I mean, it's also, you know, again, I'm not an art historian, but like when I went to visit Susan King in Auckland in New Zealand, this is an artist, amazing artist that Gary Panter, who's a friend, had told me about. He had seen it on Facebook, and I saw it. I'm like, I'm getting on a plane to Auckland to go look at this. And Susan had, she wasn't quite 70 yet, but she'd been working, just, you know, living with her family, working. She hadn't spoken since she was like 9 years old, and you know, the work was incredible, and also the work was maybe a little atypical for some of the cliches about self-taught work, where it evolved. You know, the imagery changed. It wasn't like central image all over. You know, it was like her work changed as much as like Peter Saul or, you know, people that we know in the contemporary world. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel that those are probably, for me, kind of like pure examples, maybe, if that makes sense. I don't know if I quite wrapped up that idea, but.
So you mentioned innovation. The impulse towards innovation has been, I think, a consistent theme throughout your career. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, through your eyes, what do you see as the future or a possible future for the artist home and studio?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like with anything, it's just kind of being, it's like this David Lynch thing, you know, like everyone's sort of like fishing for these ideas, more kind of being receptive and not getting like so locked into like, here's our programming for the next 50 years. You know, again, like our collaboration was such a great, you know, my fear about doing anything of this is kind of a neophyte, you know, is, you know, well, can you, the way the residency existed and people kind of like, people that I knew or then them mentioning it to their friends or like with Carla McCormick, I mean, there wasn't really any application or anything in place. You're kind of going along, and that it could find some structure. And again, through our collaboration, I think there's a little bit more structure. That's kind of rewarding. You know, I think that it's moving towards something, whether I, you know, plot it, you know, 5 years in advance. I mean, what do you think, Matt? What do you think that, I mean, I think it's, I mean, the thing about the studios is there's a there, which I don't know, like if white cube galleries can ever compete with, you know, like.
Yeah, you never want to lose the specificity of your space. We've mentioned balance several times now, but yeah, I would say this balance between preserving a historic space and realizing why it exists in the first place because of its specificity, because of what happened there, and that will always come first and foremost, but then balancing that with, okay, well, how can this historic site be in conversation with the now and with artists working today in a way that does not overshadow the original importance or compete with, but rather complement. And I think another avenue that a lot of people are looking to in that regard is how can these spaces that are so specific to the where exist in a digital world. And this is an area that I feel you are particularly forward thinking in. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about now or.
Yeah, I mean, we worked on that project with the digital spaces with Eric's show, and I am not like it's sort of like interesting because I'm not like a technology person that way. I'm not really, and there are people like that, but we, you know, when we were working on that project, we had someone come and do like a 3D scan of the Elaine space. And you realize, wow, there's a lot of things you could do here that you know, I mean, that you're not limited to in like the real world space. So that's something that we're developing. I have a couple brochures in the trunk of the I mean, no, I think it's good. You know, we're kind of, you know, we came out. We were looking at the 7 sites out here that are on the historic artist homes and studios. And it's great because they are the most densely populated is on the east end here, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, we're getting to work on that. Where I think, you know, you're kind of preserving scanning spaces and that can be viewed digitally.
Yeah, that's another method of preservation.
It is, yeah.